Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday special time because Nina and I have an event tonight. But it's lovely because it's still Zois Hanukkah, the 8th day of Hanukkah. This is Hanukkah. We actually read that in the Torah portion of the 8th day of Hanukkah today. This is the dedication of the altar. Dedication is what Hanukkah actually means. When you move into a new house, when you dedicate the temple, that's a Chanukkas Habayis. Let's light up the darkness. And we're going to be reading that today in our daf. Very interesting stuff. Perfect synchronicity. Yosef in New Jersey, Bill Edmund, Missouri, Gordo in Scotland, Melissa in Great Neck, Sharon, hang on for a second, your dedication is today. Misty in Oregon, Ella in Southern California. Today's episode of AT Daily sponsored by our very own Sharon Frant Brooks. In commemoration of the first yahrzeit of my husband's brother Bob, Ben Zion Moshe Ben Natan, which is on the final day of Chanukah. May Ben Zion Moshe Ben Natan's neshama have a great aliyah in the world of souls. May our learning lift him up even just a little bit higher in the merit of your sponsoring today's class in his memory. And Sharon, as always, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And thank you for being such a valued and important and dear member of our class. Okay, let's get into it. Our daf today is a meaty one. Continuing our journey, our exploration of Mishnah number 1 in chapter 1. In fact, it's the only Mishnah in this chapter. And I think we're probably going to finish the chapter tomorrow. Regular Friday time, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. Okay, so all of this Mishnah was how many judges are required to judge different kinds of cases in a Beis Din, in a rabbinic court. And we've looked at lots of different kinds of cases. We continue that discussion. Bottom of page 15b, our daf today is page 16. The Mishnah taught that the court judges cases involving an entire tribe that sinned only in the Great Sanhedrin, consisting of 71 judges. Again, this is something that never happened. I don't think it ever could happen. But what if, by tribe, I mean, I could be wrong here, but I assume what they mean is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. What if a whole tribe went bad? And in this case, went bad means they became idolaters, right? Building statues and worshiping them and turning their back on God. And idolatry is a death penalty offense. Whether that death penalty is ever given, and we've talked many times about why it's almost impossible for the death penalty to be applied in most cases. Nonetheless, the Torah prescribes that as the penalty if the elements and the burden of proof could be met in a court. So if we were bringing such a case, how many judges would have to sit on that court? Says here, the great Sanhedrin, right? 71 judges. Now the Gemara asks, with regard to this tribe that sinned, in what way did it sin? If we say that it was a tribe that transgressed most prohibitions, like for example, they desecrated Shabbos, well, this is difficult. There's a source to say that the merciful one distinguishes between individuals and multitudes with regard to idol worship, as there is a special law with regard to an idolatrous city. If a city, more than half of it, becomes a Jewish city that becomes idolatrous, right? So it's subject to, the penalty is to destroy that city. Okay, but that's with regard to a city. What is this question about a tribe? So this is difficult. There was a source to say that the merciful one distinguishes between individuals and multitudes with regard to avodah zarah, to idol worship, with regard to a city. But with regard to other commandments, does he distinguish between individuals and multitudes? Rather, it must be that the Mishna is discussing a tribe that was subverted and which engaged in idol worship. Right? Because if even the majority or even an entire tribe, if they were all desecrating Shabbos, which is a death penalty offense, but we wouldn't try them as a group. They would all be tried as individuals. So the Gemara asks, is this to say that we judge such a tribe with the law of a multitude, meaning that an entire idolatrous tribe is subject to the same treatment as an idolatrous city? If so, in accordance with whose opinion is the Mishnah? It is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yoshia and not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yonasan. As it is taught in a Baraisa, how many people in a city must engage in avodah zarah for it to be designated an idolatrous city? From 10 until 100 people. This is the statement of Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yonasan says from 100 people until a majority of a tribe. And it is therefore apparent that even Rabbi Yonasan, who allows a larger community to be declared an idolatrous city, said this only with regard to a majority of the tribe at most. But if it was all of the tribe that had become idolatrous, then the law of an idolatrous city does not apply. And Rav Matana said, here in the Mishnah, now we're on page 16a, we are dealing with the Nasi, the chief of a tribe who has sinned. Doesn't Rav Ada bar Ahava say, the verse states, they shall bring every great matter to you. Exodus 18:22, meaning matters of a great one, i.e. in any case where a great person is accused of a transgression, whose punishment is death, he is tried by the great Sanhedrin of 71 judges. And this Nasi of the tribe, right, the chief of a whole tribe, is also considered a great one. So his trial is by 71 judges. We're not saying we're judging the whole tribe as one. What we're really talking about is the chief of the tribe. Ula said that Rabbi Lazar had a different explanation. The Mishnah discusses a case where two tribes came to adjudicate a dispute about matters of inheritance, i.e. territory claimed by each tribe on the border between them. And this dispute is handled by the great Sanhedrin, consisting of 71 judges, as was done at the beginning of the settlement in the land of Israel during the time of Joshua. Just as at the beginning, the initial division was performed by 71 elders of the congregation, so too here, when there is a dispute about the borders determined by that initial division, the case is adjudicated by the 71 judges of the great Sanhedrin. Now the Gemara asks, if this logic is employed, then just as the beginning was performed by casting lots, kalpeh, with the urim v'tumim. So the urim v'tumim was this, it was this attribute, this element of the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, which had the 12 stones representing the 12 tribes on the breastplate, and then tucked inside between the two layers of the metal of the breastplate was something called the urim v'tumim. We're not sure exactly what it was. Some say it was a scroll or a piece of writing, with these verses from the Torah about the urim v'tumim. Others say it's other things. But for certain questions of national importance, when the spiritual level of the people was higher, the king or the high priest could basically, it was like the hotline to God, right? So they could ask a question from God in heaven, and an answer would be sent in the manner in which the stones on the breastplate would light up. And we're going to talk about some examples when that would be used. But it was this way of having, of putting questions to heaven that would be answered, right? And this was during the times of the high priest in the Mishkan in the wilderness, the tabernacle in the wilderness, and then the first 400 years in the land of Israel, and then later when Solomon's temple was built. And then at some point it stopped working because the spiritual level of the people had sunk, right? So when it was working, when this was possible, so when Joshua led the children of Israel into the promised land, and the land was divvied up among the tribes, and then within the tribes divvied up among the families, it was done by casting lots with the Urim V'Tumim, and with all of the Jewish people present. So too here, in a dispute between tribes, there should be a need for lots, the Urim V'Tumim, and the presence of all the Jewish people. And since this is not required by law, it is apparent that a border dispute between tribes need not be adjudicated using the same procedures as the original division of the inheritances. Consequently, there is no reason to require 71 judges. Rather, it is clear that this must be explained in accordance with the explanation of Rav Matana, who says that the Mishnah is discussing the Nasi of a tribe who has sinned and not border disputes. Now, Ravina said the Mishnah is actually discussing a tribe that was subverted, right, where much or most or all, most or all of a tribe has become idolatrous. And with regard to that which poses a difficulty for you, the question of whether we judge such a tribe with the law of a multitude, that they're all judged together, it can be answered, yes, although we execute them as individuals by stoning, and their money is not confiscated, nevertheless, we judge them in a court of the multitude, i.e., each of them is tried by the great Sanhedrin. You can see that this never came up in history, because we're saying a whole tribe would have to be judged by the great Sanhedrin one at a time, right? So 71 judges would have to deliberate whether to execute thousands and thousands of people, but we still have to understand what the law would be. So Ravina said, the Mishnah is actually, just read that. Ravina continues. Now, doesn't Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Yosei, say that Rabbi Oshaya says? The verse that discusses an individual who serves idol worship states, and you shall take out that man or that woman who did that evil thing to your gates, even the man or the woman, and you shall stone them until they die. Deuteronomy 17:5. And it is inferred, you take out a man or a woman to your gates to judge them in the court that is located at the gates of the city. And what court is that? The lesser Sanhedrin. 23 judges. But you do not take out an entire city to your gates. Rather, they are to be judged by the large court. Here also, with regard to a tribe that has sinned, you take out a man or a woman to your gates, but you do not take out the entire tribe to your gates. Rather, they are judged by a court of 71. New subject. The Mishnah teaches that a false prophet may be judged only by the great Sanhedrin, consisting of 71 judges. Again, death penalty offense to be a false prophet. But reaching that verdict would require a panel of 71 judges. And the Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived? And Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says it is derived by means of a verbal analogy with the meaning of Hazada, presumptuousness stated in the context of a false prophet, learned from the word presumptuousness stated in the context of a rebellious elder. So with regard to a false prophet, the verse states at Deuteronomy 18:20, "But the prophet who shall speak a word presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak," this is God talking, "or who shall speak in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die." Deuteronomy 18:20. And with regard to a rebellious elder, it states, "And the man that acts presumptuously by not listening to the priest that stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or to the judge, that man shall die." Deuteronomy 17:12. So, just as there, with regard to a rebellious elder, he is presumptuous against a court of 71 judges. We talked about that a couple days ago. What is a rebellious elder? He's someone who preaches publicly that the people should ignore some statement or law of the great Sanhedrin. That's why he's a rebellious elder, and that's a death penalty offense if the Sanhedrin that issues that law did so from Jerusalem. Just as there, with regard to a rebellious elder, he is presumptuous against a court of 71, so too here, the false prophet is judged by a court of 71. Now, the Gemara challenges this. But when this term presumptuousness is written with regard to a rebellious elder, it is written with regard to the death penalty, and a death sentence may be issued by a court of 23 judges. So why do we need 71? So rather, Reish Lakish said it is derived by means of a verbal analogy with the meaning of the term word stated in the context of a false prophet, learned from the term word, which is also used when describing the rebellious elder's rebellion. His word that he speaks out loud, publicly. So the rebellious elder transgresses by violating the commandment, and you shall do according to the word that they will tell you, meaning the elders in that generation. And with regard to the false prophet, the verse states, this false prophet who shall speak a word presumptuously in my name, says God. So just as the rebellious elder rebels against a court of 71 judges, so too a false prophet who speaks a word that is not in the name of God is sentenced to death by a court of 71 judges. And the Gemara asks, "And let the law of the rebellious elder return, and let it be derived by means of a verbal analogy with the meaning of presumptuous stated in the context of a rebellious elder, learned from presumptuousness stated in the context of a false prophet, to indicate that a rebellious elder is also sentenced by a court of 71 judges. Why did we leave that behind? Seems like it still works." And the Gemara answers, this Tana derives laws through the verbal analogy comparing the terms word and word, but he does not derive laws through a verbal analogy between the terms presumptuousness and presumptuousness, because he did not receive it as an authentic tradition. Right? And that's why, even though we might notice that the same word is used in the context of one law and then it's used in the context of another law in the Torah, and maybe in the past, the world was such that connecting those two laws wasn't necessary, not something somebody thought of, but some novel question has come up, in the context of 21st century life and culture and technology, where we might be tempted to say, oh, well, here we can draw a verbal analogy between these two laws and it will answer our question. Can we do that? No, because interpreting the Torah using these tools of these exegetical principles is not something, it's for us to study and understand how our sages did it, but it's not that we can derive laws in that manner. Right? It's only when they have this authentic tradition stretching back from the earlier sages, and they were deriving it through a tradition stretching all the way back to Sinai. New subject. Our Mishna, right? Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1, taught that the high priest may be judged only by the great Sanhedrin, consisting of 71 judges. So the Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived? And Rav Ada bar Ahava says that the verse states, they shall bring every great matter to you. And this means that Moses, or the great Sanhedrin, with 71 judges, which served the parallel role to that of Moses' his role during his lifetime, adjudicates all matters relating to a great one. For example, the high priest. Right? So if the high priest has to be tried for something, because he's the high priest, his trial is in front of the great Sanhedrin, since it affects the whole nation, because it's the high priest who brings sacrifices every day on behalf of the nation, and especially on Yom Kippur. Now, the Gemara raises an objection to this from a Baraisa. The verse states, "They shall bring every great matter to you," which is interpreted, and this is when Moses was originally, at the suggestion of Yisro, or Jethro, creating a system of higher courts, middle courts, and lower courts, because he just didn't have the bandwidth to judge all the nation's cases himself individually. So he appointed just and uncorrupt and guys who could make decisions in his name. But for a great matter, right, something that was difficult or important, that could still be brought to Moses. And after Moses left this world, that role went to the 71 elders that became the Sanhedrin. So, "They shall bring every great matter to you," which is interpreted to mean that a difficult matter is judged by the great Sanhedrin. So the Baraisa asks, do you say that the verse is actually referring to a difficult matter? Right? It's a difficult judgment to make, a difficult verdict to issue because the case is complex? It's difficult? Or is it only referring to the matters relating to a great one? When you say a great matter, do you mean that it's a difficult case to judge, and that's why we take it to Moses and later to the Sanhedrin? Or are you saying it's a great matter because it affects or it pertains or arises from one of the great leaders in the nation? So the Baraisa answers, when it states in a different verse that Moses implemented Yisro's advice, they brought the difficult matter to Moses. That's Exodus 18:26. So now, a difficult matter, this is stated explicitly. As Moses was following the directive of Yisro, it is therefore apparent that the term great matter is referring to a difficult matter, right? Since these verses are pretty close together in the Torah, it must mean that when it said great matter, what it meant was difficult matter, as shown a little bit later. Now the Gemara answers, Rav Ada bar Ahava states his opinion in accordance with the opinion of that other Tana, as it is taught in a different Baraisa. The meaning of great matter in the verse is matters relating to a great one. Not difficult to figure out the answer, but relating to great leaders. So the Baraisa asks, do you say that it is referring to matters relating to a great one, or is it only referring to a difficult matter? So the Baraisa explains, when it says further on, they brought the difficult matter to Moses, a difficult matter is stated. So how do I realize the meaning of a great matter? It is referring to matters relating to a great one. The later verse, which says difficult, wasn't helping us understand the earlier verse. It was distinguishing that there's two kinds of matters that are brought to Moses, either because they're difficult or because they affect great people, even if they're not complicated. Now the Gemara asks, and as for this Tana in the first Baraisa, who maintains that great matter and difficult matter are referring to the same law, why do I need two verses to express the same idea? And the Gemara answers, well, one is for the command in general, and the other is to state that the execution of the matter was carried out correctly. And why does the other Tana not accept this explanation? So the Gemara answers on his behalf, well, he would claim that if both verses were actually referring to the same thing, let it write either great in one verse and great in the other, or difficult in one verse and difficult in the other. What is the significance of writing great in one and difficult in the other? Conclude two conclusions from it. One verse is referring to difficult matters, and the other is referring to matters affecting a great one. Rabbi Elazar asked, if the ox of a high priest killed a person, by how many judges would the ox be sentenced? Do we compare it to a trial that could result in the death of its owner, i.e. the high priest, which would have to be judged by 71 judges because he's the high priest? Or perhaps we compare it to a trial that could result in the death of owners in general, which could be judged by 23 judges. Abaye said, since he asked the question only with regard to the high priest's ox, where there is a specific reason to say that its judicial proceedings should have the same laws as those concerning its owner, by inference it can be derived that it was obvious to him that court hearings related to the high priest's other property may be deliberated by an ordinary court. Right? So if a high priest gets into a billing dispute with his plumber, so we don't need the Sanhedrin of 71 judges to adjudicate that, even though it involves the high priest. But if he's just having an ordinary case, he happens to be involved and he's the high priest, but we don't need a court of 71. It has to be some kind of a matter that affects him in his capacity as the high priest, and therefore that affects the nation. And the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? Why should it not be so? And the Gemara answers, well, Abaye needed to clarify this, lest you say that since it writes every great matter, one might have thought that the verse is referring to all matters that involve a great one. Therefore, Abaye teaches us that this is not the law. He doesn't take his plumber disputes to the great Sanhedrin. Next subject. The Mishna teaches that the king may bring the nation out to an optional war only on the basis of a court of 71 judges, i.e. the great Sanhedrin. What's an obligatory war? Self-defense, or a war that, God, either directly speaking to the king or through a prophet to the king, says, go out and wage this war. That would be obligatory. But if a king has an idea, I think that we need to start this war, ultimately we'll be safer, and that's why I'm doing it. Not because he wants to expand his coffers. But nonetheless, it is an optional war, so to speak, right? It is a non-obligatory war. So can he do that? He's the king. Answer, no, right? The Torah imposes, rights and imposes responsibilities and limitations even on the king, right? The Torah is higher than the king. God is higher than the king. So the king is not permitted to do whatever he wants. And one of the things that he's not permitted to do is to start an optional war on behalf of the nation. If it's a self-defense war, that's not an optional war. But if it's an optional war, he has to consult with the Sanhedrin. Now the Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived? So Rabbi Bahu says it is, as the verse states, with regard to the appointment of Joshua, at the time Joshua, the successor of Moses. Quote, and he shall stand before Elazar the priest, and he shall ask counsel of the Urim before the Lord. By his word they shall go out, and by his word they shall come in, he and all of the children of Israel with him, and all of the congregation. Interesting. All of the children of Israel with him, and all of the congregation. Isn't the congregation included in all of the children of Israel? No, because the congregation in this context means something else. Rabbi Abahu analyzes the end of the verse with regard to the word he. This is the king, referring to Joshua or any other leader who brings the nation out to war. With regard to the word him in the verse, and all of the children of Israel with him. This is the priest anointed for war, the high priest anointed for war. That's different than the high priest who's bringing sacrifices in the holy temple. The priest anointed for war was anointed specially to stand and instruct the people before the battle. And all of the congregation, who is all of the congregation? This is the Sanhedrin. Consequently, the king can embark on an optional war only if the great Sanhedrin is present and grants authority to him to conduct that optional war. The Gemara challenges this, but perhaps the mention of the Sanhedrin simply means that the merciful one says that the Sanhedrin may ask a question of the Urim Vitumim, as may the king or the priest anointed for war, as opposed to anoint an ordinary person. Somebody says, hey, I really want to know, should I marry this woman or break up with her? Yeah, that's not a question that is going to be put to the Urim V'Tumim. Questions for the Urim V'Tumim are of national importance, and they're brought by the king or the high priest. But with regard to the decision to go to war, perhaps the king may do so without the agreement of the Sanhedrin. Maybe he can put that to the Urim V'Tumim, and if the Urim V'Tumim says go, then even if the Sanhedrin says don't go, he can go. Maybe. So rather, the proof is like that which Rav Acha Bar Bizna says that Rabbi Shimon Chasida says, a lyre, L-Y-R-E, a type of harp. A lyre hung above David's bed. I'm talking about King David. And once midnight arrived, the northern midnight wind would blow on the lyre and cause the lyre to play on its own. So David would immediately rise from his bed and study Torah until the dawn arrived. And once dawn arrived, the sages of Israel would enter to advise him with regard to the various concerns of the nation and the economy. Now, how is that for somebody making the most of the use of his time? In terms of sleep hygiene, I mean, wow, that sounds questionable. Maybe not for us, but we are not great like King David was. So King David presumably would go to bed, I don't know, maybe shortly after it got dark, maybe later. But at midnight, this harp, this lyre above his bed, the wind would blow on it. It would start to vibrate and music would emerge from it. And he would pop right out of bed and study Torah all night. And then in the morning start, attending to the matters of the kingship, governance, national decisions. This just sounds extraordinary. But I will tell you that there are Torah scholars who just don't waste any time. And there's a famous story about the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in the 20th century, the foremost American posek, rabbi issuing halachic rulings. And he once told, an assistant or a friend of his that he was making siyum hashas, right? He was making a completion of reading all of Shas, right? What we're doing now, Daf Yomi, we're spending 7.5 years doing it, 1 page a day. Moshe Feinstein would get through the entire Talmud faster than we do, quite a bit faster. And so he said he's making a siyum. And his friend said, oh, well, haven't you made the siyum many times? He said, yeah, but this one's special. This one's special. What's special about it? So he's making a siyum because he's read all of Shas. Everything that we're doing, going through the entire Talmud, he said this time he's completing it based on the study he did every time he was waiting online somewhere. Imagine that. Any time that he was waiting in a waiting room at the doctor, in a waiting line at the supermarket checkout counter, anytime he was waiting online, he had his Gemara with him and he was learning. And he was able to make a completion on all of Shas, all of Talmud Bavli, just based on time that we might have been sitting around daydreaming or, scrolling on our phones. Rav Moshe completed Shas during those periods of time. And apparently King David was just as diligent, and we could really take inspiration from both of them. Today, Zois Hanukkah, right? Remember, Hanukkah has that special power because it contains Rosh Chodesh in it. The month changes, it has this power for change, right? So while Hanukkah still remains Hanukkah today, 8th day of Hanukkah, particularly today, the 8th day, the completion of Hanukkah, if you need to make a change in your life, right? Get organized. How are you going to do that? How are you going to make that change? Ask God to help you. And your prayers for that assistance today have extreme power, much greater strength and power than other days of the year. Right now you can make that change and emerge from Hanukkah, on that new, higher, better path that will, be a gift to all the people around you, right? The repairs and improvements we make in ourselves, that's a blessing to the people around us, if we're going to become less angry, more active, less passive, less judgmental, more diligent, more faithful, whatever change we need to make, this is a day to pray for that. Okay, so one time they said to him, to King David, "Our master the king, your nation Israel requires sustenance." Wasn't enough food in the land. King David said to them, "Go and sustain one another, i.e. provide each other with whatever is lacking. Perhaps the rich have more than enough and they can feed the poor." The sages said to him in response, citing a parable, "A single handful, hakomets, of food does not satisfy a lion, and a cistern will not be filled merely from the rain that falls directly into its mouth. Rather, other water must be channeled into it. And so too, the nation cannot sustain itself using its own resources," right? The nation had reached a critical point where it did not have enough food. I don't know if there was a famine going on or what, but there wasn't enough food. And they said, "Yeah, you're the king. You need to solve this problem." So King David then told them, his advisors, "Okay, go and take up arms with the troops in battle in order to expand our borders and provide our people with the opportunity to earn a livelihood." Can they just go and do that? The sages, now this might have been when David was older, right? And the sages immediately sought advice. It's definitely when he was older. And they immediately sought advice from Achisophel to determine, some would say Achitophel, some say Achisophel, to determine whether or not it was appropriate to go to war at that time and how they should conduct themselves. Okay, so this advisor, Achisophel, very interesting. Let me read you a note here. Achisophel began his career as an advisor to King David, but he switched allegiances to David's son Absalom when Absalom rebelled against his father the king and tried to, make a coup and take the crown for himself. I guess he realized that he wasn't going to be crowned as the successor to King David. His brother Solomon would be. So Absalom led a rebellion against his father. And Achisophel sided with Absalom. So Achisophel was from the village of Gilo, south of ancient Jerusalem. And he was well known as an infallible advisor, like the wisest man in the land, the one that you go to when you need the top expert opinion. When the king needs the most expert advice, you go to Achisophel. And the text says that asking advice of Achisophel was tantamount to asking God, from 2 Samuel 16:23. Ironically, in modern Hebrew, the phrase advice of Achisophel means poor advice, which is the direct opposite of the original biblical term. But we see how it got that way, because Achisophel, wise as he was, ended up backing the wrong horse, so to speak, when he switched allegiance to Absalom in his doomed rebellion against King David. So, no matter how wise and experienced and learned a person might be, yeah, they can go wrong, and they can go seriously wrong, and that's why everybody needs to be humble and check their sources, check their thinking, check their analysis, etc. Okay. So King David says to his advisors, "Okay, so there's not enough food for the people. Tell the army, go expand the borders of the nation, and then we'll, have more opportunity to feed the people." So the sages immediately sought advice from Achisophel to determine whether or not it was appropriate to go to war at that time and how they should conduct themselves. And they consulted the Sanhedrin in order to receive the requisite permission to wage a war under those circumstances. And they asked the Urim V'Tumim whether or not they should go to war and whether or not they would be successful. And Rav Yosef says, what is the verse from which this Agadah, this story, is derived? Now we're on page 16b. And it is from 1 Chronicles 27:34. And after Achisophel was Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and Ebiasar, the general of the king's army, Yoav. So that individuals named in this verse correspond to the roles in the story as follows. Achisophel is the advisor whose counsel they sought first with regard to going to war. And so it says, now the advice of Achisophel, which he counseled in those days, was like that of a man who inquires of the word of God, meaning a prophet. So was the counsel of Achisophel, both with David and with Absalom. That's 2 Samuel 16:23. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, corresponds to the Sanhedrin, since he was the head of the Sanhedrin. And Ebiasar corresponds to the Urim Tumim, as Ebiasar, the son of Ahimelech, the priest, would oversee inquiries directed to the Urim Tumim. And so it says, with regard to the position of Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, as head of the Sanhedrin, in 2 Samuel 20, verse 23, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Kereti and over the Peleti. And why was the Sanhedrin called Kereti and Peleti? It was called Kereti because they were decisive, shekoretin, in their pronouncements, and it was called Peleti because their actions and wisdom were wondrous, shemuflayan, as Peleti and Muflayan share the same root. Doesn't sound like it in English, but they do, the Pei Lamed. According to the order of the verse, is it? Yeah, Pei Lamed. It's the Pei Lamed. Pei Lamed. Okay, so where am I? So according to the order of the verse, upon being instructed by King David to go to war, the sages first consulted with Achisophel, then with the Sanhedrin, and then they would ask the Urim V'Tumim. And only thereafter was the general of the king's army, Yoav, given the command to ready the army for battle. Right? So it's not that King David just gave the order. He consulted with his highest advisor, then they consulted with the Sanhedrin, and then they consulted with the Urim V'Tumim. Now Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rav Ada, and some say Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abudumi, said, what is the verse from which it is derived that David's lyre, his harp that hung on the wall, would awaken him at midnight? It's from Psalm 57, verse 9. Awake, my glory, awake, harp and lyre, I will awaken the dawn. And this means that the self-playing lyre had already awoken, and now I must engage in Torah study until dawn. I'm very inspired by that, especially to be reading it now. Because sometimes I'm just lying in bed in the morning, and I'm like, I just want to lie here for 5 more minutes. I got plenty of time to get to, morning davening, morning prayers. And in the end, I end up being 5 minutes late. And it wasn't worth it, and I should have popped out of bed like King David does. And something I'm trying to do, moving forward, is when I have moments like that, right away, give myself a grade. How did I handle that moment, right? Optimal, suboptimal, not so good, or genuine failure. Just going to tell myself where I came out in that moment. And I think that by constantly giving myself that feedback, I can improve my, ratio of instances where I behave, in the optimal manner. Now, the Mishna teaches. Back to our Mishna. What do you need? How many judges are needed for different kinds of cases? The Mishnah teaches, they may extend the city of Jerusalem or the courtyards of the temple only on the basis of a court of 71 judges. The Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived? Rav Shimi bar Chiya says, the verse states, according to all that I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its vessels, and so shall you do. Exodus 25:9. And so shall you do means for future generations, right? Moses was instructed exactly how to assemble the tabernacle in the wilderness, as well as the altar and all the utensils that were used by the priests and carried by the Levites in the Holy Temple, or in the Holy Tabernacle as it moved through the desert. But that was just that generation. What would happen in future generations? Well, again, the same law. So if you're going to be talking about expanding the Temple Mount or expanding the borders of Jerusalem, that is a kind of question that would have been brought to Moses were he alive, and when he's not alive, you bring it to the entity that replaced Moses in its authority and leadership, and that was the Great Sanhedrin. The Gemara answers, it is different there. As the verse states, and it came to pass on the day that Moses completed erecting the tabernacle, that he anointed it and sanctified it and all its vessels, and the altar and all its vessels, and he anointed them and he sanctified them. That's Numbers 7:1. So the verse emphasizes that he sanctified them. And from this, it is inferred that only those utensils need sanctification by anointment, right? The original vessels, when the Holy Tabernacle was first put into use, and the daily sacrificial service and sacrifices being brought on behalf of people who needed sacrifices brought, etc., when they first started, right? When God originally gave us those commandments in the Torah in the wilderness, the first time they did it, all the utensils needed to be anointed, right? Somehow touched with the holy oil. But for future generations, there is not a requirement of sanctification by anointment. So if that's what if when we're talking about future generations, what the verse is saying, in future generations, you won't need to anoint, that would suggest that in future generations, we don't know whether you need to consult with the Great Sanhedrin or not before doing something like expanding the boundaries of the Temple Mount or of Jerusalem itself. We haven't heard about that, right? For your future generations, if we need that verse to teach us that future utensils in the Holy Temple don't need anointing, then we don't know how many judges are needed for expanding boundaries. Now the Gemara asks, and say instead, those vessels require sanctification specifically by anointment. But for future generations, it could be done either by anointment or by service, meaning once they're used, they've been sanctified. Rav Papa said, once they've been used in the temple, they become sanctified. And the verse states with regard to this, Numbers 4:12, and they shall take all service vessels with which they shall serve in the sanctuary. And the verse renders it dependent upon service, meaning that it is the service, right, the avoda. When a priest uses these utensils in the holy temple, those utensils become sanctified, right? Whereas in Moses' time, when Moses had them anointed, they became sanctified immediately, even before they had been used. In later generations, only once they had actually been used as part of the service in the Holy Temple would they become sanctified, right? Would they become holy and consecrated to that work? So the Gemara challenges this and asks, but if so, why do I need the extra word them? This emphasis seems superfluous. And so the Gemara answers, had the verse not added the word them, I would say for future generations, the sanctification is accomplished by anointment and by service together, as it is written, and so you shall do. Therefore, the merciful one writes the word them to teach they alone are consecrated by anointment, but for future generations, the vessels are not consecrated by anointment, rather by being brought into service. New subject. The Mishna teaches that they appoint a lesser Sanhedrin for the tribes only on the basis of a court of 71 judges. Right? That a lesser Sanhedrin hears capital cases, 23 judges. Okay, but who appoints those 23 judges who are going to hear murder cases? The Great Sanhedrin. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive this matter? And the Gemara answers, it is, as we find with regard to Moses, who established lesser courts for all of the people. See Exodus 18, verses 25 and 26. And Moses stands in place of the 71 judges of the great Sanhedrin. Consequently, a lesser Sanhedrin that stands at the head of a tribe is appointed by the great Sanhedrin in the same way that Moses appointed lower court judges. The sages taught in a Baraisa, from where is it derived that society must establish judges for the Jewish people. And the verse states, quote, "You shall place judges and officers over you in all of your gates that the Lord your God gives you for your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment." Right? You can't just have a just society by everyone committing we're going to have a just society. You have to have systems of courts of law to ensure that there's going to be justice in the society. We learned that from Deuteronomy 16:18. From where is it derived that society must also establish officers for the Jewish people? Officers, right, are like cops who are going to enforce the rulings of the judges. Well, the same verse states, "You shall place judges and officers." And from where is it derived that society must also establish judges not only for the entire Jewish people, but also for each and every tribe? The verse states, "You shall place judges and officers from your tribes." From where is it derived that society must also establish officers for each and every tribe? The same verse states, "You shall place judges and officers for your tribes." From where is it derived that society must also establish judges for each and every city? The verse states, "You shall place judges and officers for your gates, as the gate of the city is the seat of the elders of the city and its judges." And from where is it derived that society must also establish officers for each and every city? The verse states, "You shall place judges and officers for your gates." Rabbi Yehuda says you must also have one court appointed over all of them. As it is stated, "You shall place over you," meaning that there must be a single institution that is responsible for all of these appointments. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, and we can derive one more law from the verse, "For your tribes, and they shall judge." And this teaches that it is a mitzvah, it is a commandment for a tribe to judge the sinners from within its tribe and not to delegate that responsibility to other tribes, right? So each tribe must clean its own house, so to speak. New subject. Our Mishnah states that a city may be designated as an idolatrous city only in accordance with the ruling of the great Sanhedrin consisting of 71 judges. And the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? Right, now we're talking about the idolatrous city that we mentioned before in passing when we were talking about a tribe. Could a tribe be designated as an idolatrous tribe? The Mishnah mentions it, but the Torah doesn't. But the concept of an idolatrous city, right, a city within Israel, a Jewish city, where the majority of the city becomes idolatrous, building idols and worshiping it, the Torah says that city you shall destroy it, right? The people are executed and all of the property in that city is burned up. No one can benefit from it. Very harsh punishment for an idolatrous city. I don't think that this death penalty was ever used, but the law is on the books. So let's see how it would work. All right. The Mishnah states that a city may be designated as an idolatrous city only in accordance with the ruling of the great Sanhedrin, so 71 judges. And the Gemara asks from where these matters derived, and Rabbi Chia bar Yosef says that Rabbi Shaya says, as the verse states with regard to one who engages in idol worship, and you shall take out that man or that woman who did that evil thing to your gates, Deuteronomy 17:5. And it is inferred, you take out a man or a woman to your gates for the lesser Sanhedrin to judge them, 23 judges. But you do not take out the entire city to your gates. Rather, they are to be judged by the great Sanhedrin. The Mishnah also taught that the court may not designate a city as an idolatrous city if it is on the frontier. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? And the Gemara answers, the verse states, certain worthless people have gone out from your midst and have led astray the inhabitants of their city. Deuteronomy 13:14. And the merciful one states that this law applies when they come from your midst, meaning from within your country, but not from the frontier. We're not speculating yet why God created this law. We're saying how we know that this law doesn't apply to border towns. The Mishnah taught, and 3 adjoining cities may not be designated as idolatrous cities. The source for this ruling is as it is written in Deuteronomy 13:13, if you shall hear concerning one of your cities that the Lord your God has given you, concerning one of your cities, but not 3 cities. So the Mishnah continues, but the court may designate 1 city or 2 adjoining cities as idolatrous cities. And the source for this is as it is written, your cities, plural, one of your cities, plural. So the sages taught in a Baraisa, the verse states 1, from which it is inferred 1, but not 3. Do you say that the meaning is 1, but not 3? Or rather, is this not the meaning of the verse, that it is 1, but not 2? It says one of your cities. That just sounds like 1. Why would you say that 2 cities that are adjoining could be designated idolatrous, but you don't draw the line at 3? And the Bryce explains that this cannot be. When the verse states your cities, 2 are stated. How do I realize the meaning of 1? 1, but not 3. At times, Rav said it is in 1 court that they may not designate more than 2 adjoining cities as idolatrous cities, but in 2 or 3 courts, they may designate them. And at times, Rav said, even in 2 or 3 different courts, they may never designate them. And what is the reasoning of Rav? It is due to desolation, to ensure that there will not be large swaths of uninhabited land in the land of Israel. And Reish Lakish says they taught only that the court may not designate 3 adjoining cities as idolatrous cities in 1 region, but in 2 or 3 regions they may designate them. And Rabbi Yochanan says they may not designate them due to this concern for desolation of the land. And the Gemara comments it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. The court may not designate 3 adjoining cities as idolatrous cities in Eretz Yisrael, but they may designate 2, such as 1 in Judea and 1 in the Galilee. But they may not designate 2 in Judea or 2 in the Galilee. And if the city is near the frontier, they may not designate even 1. And what is the reason for this? Now we go to the reason. Perhaps the non-Jews on the other side of the border will hear that there is a city on the border that is desolate, and they will seize the opportunity to invade and destroy the land of Israel. The Gemara asks, but let him derive this law from the fact that the merciful one states, from your midst, from which it is inferred, but not from the frontier. And the Gemara answers, this Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, as he interprets the reason for the mitzvah in the verse and draws halakhic conclusions based on that interpretation. But other sages don't do this. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Mishnah teaches that the great Sanhedrin was composed of 71 judges, and that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it was composed of only 70, as Moses gathered 70 men of the elders of the Jewish people. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, Moses himself was not counted as part of that group. So the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of the rabbis who say that when Moses gathered 70 men, he was at the head of the court and is therefore counted among them? Well, the verse states, quote, and the Lord said to Moses, gather me 70 men from the elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and they shall stand there with you. Pretty good source to indicate that Moses is one of them. So there's 71, i.e. they will stand with you, and you are to be counted with them, leading to a total of 71. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that the term with you is mentioned due to the divine presence that rested on Moses. According to the Rabbi Yehuda, Moses was instructed to remain with the 70 elders in order for the divine presence to rest upon them as well. He was not formally part of their court, and therefore the number of sages on the great Sanhedrin, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is 70. We are at the top of page 17a now. The Gemara asks, and how would the rabbis respond to this line of reasoning? And the Gemara answers, the verse states, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, which indicates with you, and you are to be counted with them. And how would Rabbi Yehuda respond? He would explain that the term with you means similar to you, meaning that the elders appointed to the court had to be of fit lineage and free of blemish, like Moses. And from where do the rabbis derive that law? Since they don't follow this reasoning, they derive it from what was stated with regard to the appointment of the ministers of thousands and the ministers of hundreds. Quote, and they shall make it easier for you and bear the burden with you. Understanding the term with you to mean similar to you. And the law of the judges of the great Sanhedrin of 70 is derived from the law of the judges of the lesser Sanhedrin, i.e. those ministers that Moses appointed. That's where we'll knock off, and we'll continue tomorrow, Friday, the regular winter Friday time of 11:30 a.m. A few questions. Bill, would the Nasi of the Levites be the Kohen Gadol as the highest ranked Levite or someone else? What a great question. Right, so the Kohen Gadol is one of the descendants of Aaron, but Aaron was Moses' brother, and Moses and Aaron were Levites, right? So they were the tribe of Levi. And the Levites did not have a region in the land of Israel. They were not given land, right? Rather, they would receive the tithe, and their portion would be to serve the Lord. Not all the Levites could be serving the Lord at all times, so they lived in cities. They're Levitical cities, right? The Levites settled in cities, and so were involved not in agriculture as farmers, but all the other kinds of jobs that people could have in ancient Israel. Nonetheless, they were a tribe. So was there a Nasi of the Levites? Would that be the Kohen Gadol? I don't know offhand. Makes sense. Or maybe they just didn't have a Nasi. They merited to have the Kohen Gadol be from their tribe, so they didn't need a Nasi in the sense that they needed to remain, they were like the District of Columbia. They're not a state, right? Because they need to have a place that doesn't belong to any other state so that they could remain impartial and neutral and able to govern and to judge in that manner. I'm just speculating. Sharon, Urim means lights, and the stones on the breastplate of the high priest would light up. So I always drew the conclusion that at least the Urim was the lights. That makes sense to me. I like it. Bill, does a war compelled by treaty still fall under the category of optional war? Example, a treaty of mutual defense is signed with a neighboring realm. The neighbor is attacked, but not Israel. Is that still a defensive war, or is it now an optional war? What a great question. I don't know. It's funny, would it be called an optional war? Perhaps what they would say is, first of all, at the time of signing the treaty, right, this possibility would be created from that moment. So perhaps before signing the treaty, they would have to consult the Urim V'Tumim, and or when that matter comes up, they would then say, okay, well, now this war and going out to war, does this fall within what we pledged in that treaty? That's not always so simple, and perhaps that would be a question that they would have to consult on at that time. Yosef, the prophets speak of the righteous remnant. Is this because of a possibility that an entire court could be corrupt? It's funny, when they talk about the righteous remnant, I'm not sure that they're talking about courts and judges. I think they're talking about the righteous remnant of the people, right? Meaning, sadly, so many Jews, have either wandered away from Torah, a life of Torah mitzvahs, or their parents did, and they've grown up not even knowing anything. That's why so many Jews today are considered like kidnapped babies, right? That they didn't know what the laws were. They're ignorant of the law, and so they won't be held accountable for all the laws that they violate. Unless they might be held accountable for the fact that they know they're Jewish and they should have learned what it means to be a Jew and what the requirements are. But some Jews don't even know they're Jewish because it's been generations that their families have been away. So the righteous remnant would suggest, the remnant of the people who, have remained true to God and Torah and are living a life of Torah mitzvahs. That's the way I understand it. That's what I've got. Well, and Yosef says halakhic midnight or chatzos right now is 12 a.m. In the summer, it is around 1 a.m. So, Yosef also is talking about, the way that the day is divided into halakhic hours, right? And it's the sort of portions of daylight. I've taught this in the past. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. But the idea that a halakhic hour, right, and as the lengths of days and nights is always changing during the year, that's why if you get the accidental Talmudist app, right, so we have halakhic times. There's a menu item called halakhic times that adjusts itself for wherever you are geographically. And tells you like what time in the morning is the earliest time you can say the Shema, and what's the latest time you can say the Shema, from when you can put on talis and tefillin, what's the earliest you can say the Amidah, etc. There are halakhic times, and it's because halakhic hours are not 60 minutes long. They're sort of just divisions of the daylight that we have at any particular time of year. And Yosef is mentioning that right now, Hatzos, midnight, when David would awaken and start studying Torah because his, the wind was making his lyre produce music. Right now, it actually is midnight. At other times of the year, it would not be. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, regular Friday time in winter, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. Have a great night. And may this Zois Hanukkah, 8th day of Hanukkah, be meaningful and impactful in your life. One last thing, I just shared again the video with a new introduction about why Jews have to bury our dead, why we don't cremate, why cremation is prohibited. If you didn't know about that, or if you know a Jew who might not know that cremation is prohibited and why cremation is prohibited, please share that video with them. It's on the Accidental Talmudist Facebook, Accidental Talmudist Instagram, and TikTok and X for that matter. But please share that video and save a Jew from being cremated who might allow it to happen or want it to happen out of simply not knowing what the tradition and why the law holds that cremation is prohibited for Jews. All the best.